Welcome back to Beneath the Branches. I'm joined here today with Kelly Curry, one of our therapists, and Amy Elmore, our developmental therapist, Dr. Chambers, a pediatrician. So we are going to talk today about language transitions and connection. With international adoptees, there is almost always a language transition, and although connection doesn't require a language, connection does facilitate language acquisition, because when a child feels safe, when a child feels secure, then they can flourish in learning a new language.
Well,
So,
and it demands communication.
yes, it demands communication.
Right.
Yeah. So, I just should ask you guys for funsies, if you could not communicate for a whole day, what kind of techniques would you use to communicate?
I
Amy?
would do gestures a lot. I could get really, and my face will tell the story.
We should try that one day.
For funsies.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it for a whole 1 hour though. But I would be so good. Like, yeah, we're going to drive and go in the car.
You would be good at this.
I mean,
Look,
because
that's what
but
you
I
do
think it's
anyway.
because I do it with my face all day long when I'm doing any type of therapy. I mean, to me, that's why when we were in a mask, it took away so much communication, because if you couldn't see my face, you couldn't tell that I was safe, that I was happy. Was it in intensity? So if they're only looking at the eyes, all they had was the intensity part. And of course, my second best thing would be I would use my phone, and I would type in and then have it text read aloud.
Oh, there you go.
Mm-hmm. I would do that, or do what my oldest son does. His best way, he does all the GIFs. And there's always a picture that literally exactly what he's trying to tell me. So that's what he sends me. So that's what I was thinking.
That's a good one.
I would figure out how to send great little GIFs.
Like just communicate through that.
Right. Just the fact that I even know the word GIF is a big deal.
You're hip, Amy.
And I know what it is. A year ago, would not have known what that was.
I like
That's
that.
mine.
Mine is the same, gestures. I think gesturing. One, I do it a lot anyways.
Would
Like,
yours
I
be
talk with my
grandiose
hands.
or little? Like, could you see yourself
I don't see
acting it out
myself
completely?
It depends on who I'm with, because like when I'm in like the therapy space, if I have like a little kid, you do a lot more like big gesturing, but like in just typical day to day, like if we did our experiment where we didn't communicate verbally for an hour, I would still or like leading you to things, like I'll just grab your arm and like pull you,
Or the whole time you'd be like, did you want something to eat?
That would be primarily kitchen.
There you go. Perfect.
I would probably rely a lot on facial expression, and I think it's because I'm constantly reading people's facial expressions and reading tone. And so I would do a lot, I think, of tone and facial expression more so. And
I would be pretending that I knew more sign language than I do, and I'd constantly be going, you okay? You okay? Yes. That's yeah.
But for our kids, it can be, and for the parents, it's one of the most disorienting parts of international adoption, because that's how we help people through stressful times, primarily, is to talk to them through it. And then here you have a new child and you can't talk to them through it.
Well, and I think most of our parents, I don't know about y'all, but just in our years of doing this, parents expect the kids to be able to do so much more than they really can.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially from an international adoption perspective.
Yeah.
They expect them to have more language than they do. One of my favorite questions, and we now, I try to remind myself when I meet people who are about to go and adopt and travel, is I will say, is there any way possible, ask the interpreter what they hear them saying. Do they call it baby talk? Is it babble? Do they ask a question like, what's that? Where are we going? Just to try to find out, get a glimpse of what did someone who spoke their dialect hear. Mm-hmm. Because that gives me some type of foundation.
It does. It really does. Because if they're 5 and their speech isn't clear in their native language, that speech delay is going to translate to English as well, right? And
Right. And
so,
we got to know where's our base level
yeah.
where we're going to start communicating. I mean, we already kind of know what we want to do, but it also helps family members know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think common problems that we definitely will see is that the speech was delayed in the native language, that oftentimes there's a sudden loss of the first language. The child is often mixing languages. There might be an extreme delay of learning the new language. So all of those issues are things that we can talk through today and common scenarios that we see. Um, let's talk first about the grief of losing your first language. There's a grief associated with it. Yeah.
I mean, again, I think that we have to remember that language is just one more huge loss for our kids, especially our kids who, again, are coming from one culture to another. They're losing smells, they're losing food, they're losing language, which is like what you're so used to hearing all the time. And so you snatch them away from that and plop them in a different culture, and that's huge. Everything sounds different, smells different, looks different, tastes different. Their senses are completely overwhelmed by.
Very overstimulating.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're losing language is part of identity. So you're losing that identity of yourself. And then you also are losing people because then if you're not able to communicate with those people, then you're losing those people too. So it is a true grief in many of our children.
And it's a grief that will oftentimes stick around, like especially kids who are, if you have a child that's adopted, when they're young, don't expect the loss of language to just go away once they learn English, because it may pop back up. Especially during like big processing years, like around 8 and 9, when they're a teenager, when they're trying and searching for identity in their culture, there's a grief associated with, hey, listen, like I'm Korean, but besides the way I look, and sometimes not even the way I look, nothing else about me is Korean. I can't speak the language. I can't, do so many culturally Korean things. And that's just another hit on identity and brings up a lot of grief.
And I think it's interesting too that grief may not be there in the beginning too, like it can be, but also there's some kids that reject their culture and they reject their language initially, and don't want anything to do with it. And if someone's speaking their language near them, it heightens their anxiety, especially if they were treated poorly in their orphanage. If they were treated poorly and they want to just kind of leave that behind, then that can cause a strong reaction to them. But the majority, I feel like, have some sort of grief over the language or confusion and frustration.
We've had some instances where they will have like a family member or a friend that will come who can speak it, but literally it can cause a child to shut down.
Yeah.
And we've seen that when they're newly home.
Yeah.
Because they hear it, and part of that, like I've always wondered, is it a fear of, is that person taking me? Wait a minute, that was attached to somewhere else.
Right.
And it sort of disrupts that flow of learning about a new place. So you never know which one
you're going to get.
Right.
It depends on the age of the child too, I think. Let's talk about that. Like, how long does it take to learn a new language and what are the parts that impact that?
I think it's really important to remember, and Amy, you can speak more into this too, is that kids receptively pick up language a lot more quickly than they can expressively say language,
Right, because it forces communication. Like when they're now in their home, there's got to be a way to communicate. And so they literally kind of let that first language go, and they're like, okay, that's the word for eat.
Right.
This is where we're going. This is bath. This is bed. Those kinds of things. They literally pick up on them super fast.
Right. And it's important to remember too, like really quickly. It happens so quickly, especially if there's not language delays in their first language. Like the loss of language and being able to receptively understand English comes so quickly that parents often don't even understand or realize how much your child is understanding. And so you do have to be careful even with like talking about their stories or saying things in front of them because you think that they don't understand. A lot of times they are picking up on things, especially depending on their age. I think the other thing is like parenting in that gap. When your child loses their language, they can understand receptively a lot of what you're saying, but expressively they can't communicate. Especially when you have like younger kids, even older too, but I see it a lot in our younger kids. That's when a lot of big behaviors can come out of frustration.
Because they can't communicate and they
Right.
can't tell you how to meet their needs. And their wants, for
Right.
that matter.
But they're understanding most of what you're saying, but they can't expressively say anything. It's so
then
trapped.
Right, and then you have a lot more fussy, whining, and that's even for a 3, 4, and 5-year-old.
And sometimes hitting, aggression will come out a lot.
Screaming
Yeah.
for 30 minutes,
Uh-huh.
30-minute screaming matches.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they fall asleep because they're utterly exhausted. But yes, that trying to give them some way to communicate right off the bat. And that's why we do love just trying to even use a few signs for sign language. I love to always, like more, eat, drink, finished, which of course is my favorite rather than all done. And most of our families already have all done with the waving hands. And I'll say, let's do something different, because what we have to do for the kids is give them something immediately that they can like really looks grandiose. So I love finished, crossing the arms in the front. And if they don't, like, you can take their arms, go, we are finished. We can get down from this table, or a bath is over. Your diaper change is done. The car ride is over, because the kids hate the car ride. But yes, we just got to give something to communicate, because if we don't, then we're literally telling them their voice and what they're feeling isn't important.
Right.
So, and sometimes we have to pretend we know.
Yeah.
But it's okay to pretend, but yes.
I think the other thing too, especially when we're talking about sign language, is some parents, because I think a few signs, especially early on, is really important, but don't get into the habit of just relying on signs and not challenging your children to speak. Because so many times, especially after 3 to 6 months, we'll see kids come in at 12 months home. They don't have a history of language delay, but families have been relying on sign language too much. And so expressively, they're having trouble.
Always have to say the word with the sign. That is very important. One thing I do always tell families is around that 6-month mark after being home, it's okay to start requiring a little bit more communication. And that's where I always kind of say that's where the tough love gets in, because then they're like, no, but I never had to say it before. But up until then, using the sign and the word, whether they say it or not, is just not as important, because it messes with attachment. I love how I feel like everything I say with the development really does go back to attachment, because we can push, but I really don't recommend to push till after that 3 days. I mean, honestly, most of the time it's 6 months. And I'm okay with a speech and language delay then, up till, once we get there, then I'll go, okay, now we can try to push a little bit. Because if we've done it the best way possible, we've created love, we've created attachment, we've decreased anxiety, and now we can just work on communication.
And I think it's important to note too why it's so important to go to an adoption competent provider, because that is so contrary to what a lot of people would say needs to happen.
Right. They just think it's just getting anybody into their world, and it's we need somebody that looks on and says, this delay right now is okay. Because we know you did everything the way I don't know, correct, I know it's not the best way, but everything that we would have recommended to do ahead of time. Because if you lay the foundation, the rest of it's going to come. And it's okay to have a delay at that point. If I expect it. I'm going to also question, well, how did you get all the way called up? So then I'm going to wonder, is it intellect? Which brings on a whole new issue for another day. But yes, it's going to be, how does that manage in the household and, siblings and grandparents? And one of my own personal stories is I was teaching, again, my oldest to sign, because, felt like if I was telling other people, they needed to use it. And so I told him more, so he didn't do, and that's another good idea with sign language. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be what you wanted it to be, as long as it gave your child a way to communicate. So more is, of course, putting your fingers together and bringing it in front of you. Well, my kiddo didn't do that as well. He clapped. So it was a form of a clap. So the one time, like when he's finally won, and I finally thought, let's go away for the day, and the grandparents are keeping him, they're like, he's so excited over food. He claps, at the end of the meal, like, that was great. And I went, no, he was still hungry. And so then I, of course, never even thought to tell the grandparents that that's his more. Of course, they never would even probably even realize I taught him sign language. But yeah, so one of his great stories. It was like, and then please is just putting a circle, like on your chest. But his please was the whole chest down to the stomach, please. And he's eating like an ice cream sandwich, down to a diaper. And there's ice cream and chocolate sandwich, all over. Please, can I have some more? Yeah.
So cute.
That's good. Yeah, and I think, I feel like sometimes the older the child, the more frustrating it is, even too for the parents, because little children naturally communicate through behaviors and through gestures. They just kind of naturally, you can see everything over their face. But an older child doesn't. And so then we've got these little speech devices on our phones, right? And it is helpful to tell your child something on the speech device. But a lot of children just don't like the speech devices on the phone. I mean, I think it's going to get better as AI is developing. It's going to get better, these translation techniques. But a lot of people go into the adoption thinking, oh, well, I'm going to use this app. And they're right. They're going to use this app, but the kid may not. The kid may not.
And then because their behavior is to shut down and to not do anything. For all you know, they may be pretending to not understand it.
Right.
And you don't know if it interpreted it correctly. And so I've seen the frustration where they're like, yeah, I'm not going to give you anything.
Right. Well, it's just like for our kids, it's just like one more thing. This is one more hard thing that I'm having to do,
Yeah. And so I think we can, like we were kind of talking about what we would do if we couldn't speak for a day, but there are, those techniques are helpful. Those techniques are helpful, gesturing, pointing. A lot of times we'll create a picture book where we have common items that the child's going to need to ask for, like, like water or food or bathroom. And then that way they can point. Those are really, really helpful, especially during the trip. But I think that we have to use just a kind of a mix of tools. Gestures and facial expression and tone of voice, though, just don't underestimate the power that has to set a mood and to put your child at rest or to amp your child up, right? Because even if you can't communicate, 90% of communication really honestly is in tone and gestures, nonverbal communication. So you can project you're a safe person very easily, or the opposite, through your facial expression and your tone.
So true.
Yeah. And so instead of just being neutral during that time with facial expression and tone, you've got to overdo it. You've got to really overdo it with your soft eyes or your happy eyes and your soft or happy tone, even if you're not soft or happy sometimes, because the child is that's the language the child's going to understand. And that's the language that's going to regulate the child.
So one of my favorite tricks for that is, especially for, even up to like 6, 7, 8-year-olds, is telling parents, don't over communicate it. Keep your words simple. Use 2 to 3 word phrases. And the difference is as a parent, it keeps you from getting amped up. You can control your attitude and your tone with fewer words. If once you start trying to explain something, it may all start to come out. Then your face changes, your body language changes. But if you're just like, let's eat, time to eat, you can maintain what you're saying and it comes across in a more positive way. And that's especially when you're first home, you don't have to communicate. We do this because it's the right thing to do. No, we do this because here's some food.
Yeah.
Do you want, and literally where you just go, you put out your hands, do you want this or this? And offering those 2 choices. I thought about that with the other podcast that we did about food, wanting to offer choices, but it's the same thing for language, because if they can't expressively tell us, we're putting it out there and then they can look at one or touch one. Yeah. And they can be older and do that.
Exactly. You can keep things very, very simple. And one of the techniques that we use too is looking at picture books, so you use it, especially, of course, for like toddlers and preschoolers, to look at picture books, and you're naming things in the picture books and you're teaching them vocabulary by looking at books. But even an older child, if they will allow it, you can read much younger books to them. And that's also a bonding, strong attachment activity is to read together. And that way you can go back and capture some of that early language.
When do you think, and I would love your opinions on both of this, what about for the older child, even like you said, past like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we're kind of getting up there. But when you're doing a book, I do love books, picture books, because you can talk about what's on the page versus just maybe the words that were written, because it already can't read the English language, so it gives it more. But have you found that helpful, or have you tried that even with olders, like with older adoptees? Yeah.
If a 13-year-old will let you read Winnie the Pooh book to them, you do it, because then there's the pictures and you can look at it, and they don't always necessarily know it's a baby book. Some of them won't let you do that.
We've got there's so many books
I
out
was about
now.
to say graphic novels
graphic
are
novels,
so huge
yeah.
right now.
See, I didn't even go to Winnie the Pooh. I was thinking, like the fish book and and all of those.
Diary of a Wimpy Kid,
Yes.
even like those are so big right now.
You can
but
talk
there's
about what you
pictures.
see,
Yeah,
and then it gives it meaning as to what's happening in the picture. Yeah.
right. With older kids too, I did want to mention also, because so many families who adopt, I'm talking about internationally, they will they take everything that we say to heart about how important language is, that they really try to want to create an environment where their child is able to keep their first language, and just like maybe talking about how difficult that is.
Yeah, and the pros and cons of that too. So keeping a native language, most people would choose that, obviously, if they could. And sometimes you're able to do it, and probably the majority of times you're not able to, depending on the age. Once a child hits maybe 12, 11, 12, 13, 14, then you're more likely to be able to keep that old language. And because across the older the child is, the farther they are into puberty, the more likely you're going to be able to keep that language. And if you are wanting to do that, and then you do need to have either someone that they can regularly speak to that is fluent, not just partially fluent, because then that kind of creates
And it has to be very
problem.
regular.
Very regular, at least once a week. If possible, you can do more, but you can do just once a week. And then you can do TV shows or music in that child's native language in between to help them, and even books in the child's native language at their reading level. So books, TV, music in between, having someone to talk to weekly will usually set you up for being able to maintain that language. And that is if cognition is normal.
Right.
I was going to say that.
So if cognition isn't normal, then it's going to be really hard to maintain. Unless someone in the home is fluent in that language.
And the same with younger kids, right?
Exactly. The same with younger kids as well. If someone is fluent in that home, then you are probably going to be able to keep that language. And again, I want to just say they have to be really fluent, because sometimes we can be teaching our children, for example, Spanglish instead of keeping Spanish and English. But if the child has intellectual disabilities of any kind, then they really just need a language, right? And so sometimes trying to maintain both is going to cause more problems. It's going to put them further back in school. So you're just going to really focus on whatever language they're going to have in school and in the family, which is usually English here. And so that we can catch them up and help them academically learn based off of that language. And the younger kids they do catch up faster. So usually we used to say, I don't even know, how much research is still there for this, but we would definitely say then their language, especially their academic language, which is different than your social language, is caught up at twice the age of adoption. So,
I still feel that's pretty
I do
true.
too. I really do. Because if you're adopted at 5, you're going to learn social language fast, which is, hey, pass the salt and pepper, or can I have more peas, right? That's social language, because that's what you use every day. But academic language is almost a whole nother language, because you're using words that you don't use in regular everyday speech. And so really that's going to be at 10 years old before that 5-year-old can test on standardized testing equally to their peers.
And we do see, so if you adoptee comes home younger, 2 and 3, We sometimes can even see speech called up if there are no other concerns within a year. So I say 6 months, I'm going to see the delay, but then after that is when, because now you've worked on attachment and you've worked on all the bonding ideas, then now we can work on the speech aspect and the development.
Right.
But what's hard about that is that when it's not coming, is having that idea of, okay, now is a good time to try some speech therapy if it's an expressive or understanding. But I definitely would not recommend it before after before 6 months home, unless very, very certain circumstances where we do ask to at least look into that for a therapeutic standpoint.
Because really what they're needing at that point in the first 6 months home is listening to language and listening to your language, listening to simplified English.
Getting it in their everyday life, in their home environment, and not in an environment where you're forced to have to say something to get something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, those language gaps do go away faster if a child is kindergarten or below, right? Because we have a chance to catch up language before kindergarten, first grade starts, where we are starting to do more difficult academic tasks based on language, right? Versus going into third grade and here you are trying to do math problems with language. It's just so
and then add
impossible.
reading English in there.
Right.
I mean, for a math problem, a word problem, a
Right.
whole nother level of a problem.
Let's talk about school issues. So you bring home a second grader, a child who's second grade age, and you bring them home in May and you're starting school in the fall. What are things that we need to consider?
Of course, my favorite, my first thought is we try to go back 1 year because we're trying to get back to where a foundation might be. So I know a lot of times we love to write letters to help a school understand why we might do that and to explain to the family why we might do that, because we're trying to meet them where they are, where things are not so difficult. The second big thing I feel like we provide so much education for is when you want to go into school and then maybe a family member would like them to get help and services. You cannot, at least in most states, you need to show that they've been home a year before they will then do testing to see if they could get some accommodations or an IEP. And so it automatically, just because you bring them home, doesn't mean they're going to do that. So first they're going to try English as a second language. So school system is going to say, we need to look into this, give them that time to learn before we can jump into, some type of assistance or therapy or more accommodations in the classroom. But that's why it's such a good reason to get to go back a year, setting them up for success, as long as we can, due to maybe their height and weight, what do they look like compared to their peers? But we do try to plead the case for them.
Because really that first year, you're just learning English. You're barely learning the material at the school. You're surviving, you're learning how to live in a family, you're anxious, you're trying to learn the language. And then if you're able to go up a grade that's a little bit more appropriate, then you've at least got the language skills before you're actually doing second grade.
Academically, we're not going to increase our learning abilities if we don't feel safe and secure.
Right. And that's what I was going to say too, is, in that scenario, you said a kid comes home in May, but what if they come home in January? Or February? This is just, again, another opportunity to advocate for, don't put your kiddo right in school as soon as they get home. Right. That is completely overwhelming for them and will derail attachment as the foundation, which is the most important thing for learning too, So again, language is just one more reason why we don't want to throw our kids in school as soon as they come home. They need some time to learn functional language and attachment before you expect academic language and school and the pressures of all that to come.
And we can do another podcast. Maybe we'll do another podcast on school placement and making that decision. How do you make that decision? Childcare, daycares, things like that.
When, where.
That sounds good. We'll do that.
How you make the decision.
Yeah.
What else? What else with language that comes to your mind?
One thing I did want to mention, kind of like the purpose of this podcast is talking about language acquisition and connection. You mentioned it before, Jennifer, but I think I think it's really important for parents because so many times, especially if the kid is older, parents are not prepared for how much not being able to understand and them not feeling understood by their kid can affect attachment. So just again, use time before your children come home to like explore that, because that is really hard. Time and time again, I see parents really having trouble with connection and attachment because of language acquisition. But then once that happens, they're like, oh man, that mattered so much. And I didn't realize how much it mattered for me. So again, just one more way to kind of prepare yourself and be self-aware about how that may affect your connection, your feelings towards your child.
Let me ask you this, because some people have the opportunity to have another person, a friend of theirs who speaks the same language as the child, come into the home.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we balance
Yeah.
that?
I think that can be difficult, but the first thing I would say is you've got to see how your child is going to respond to that. Because like we mentioned before, some kids, when they get home, like they're very like negatively triggered by hearing their language. The other thing that you have to assess for is it's so much easier for a newly home child in a lot of ways, in a lot of scenarios, to connect with somebody who speaks their language versus connect with you. So I think that if you do that, you're going to have a lot of boundaries around like how long, when, the scenarios in which you have somebody come in and speak to your child, because it has the potential to, not in all cases, but it does have the potential to affect attachment.
And I think it is a good tool to use to explain things to the child. So it might be really nice in the first, in the small doses, and having those boundaries like, hey, you're going to come. I'd love for you to come for like 30 minutes to an hour. And then have a list. These are the things that I want you to remind your child. We are safe. There's plenty of food. We're not going to hurt you in any way. We love you. This is permanent. Here's the bathroom.
Right. Yes.
So
The basics.
The basics.
and what food are you missing the most?
Right.
What food would you really like? That kind of thing. To be able to, because it's so confusing, and you can't tell the child any of this, especially if they're 5. They're not going to use the translation device very much to do that. So it is helpful
They'll
to
want
have
it to
those.
play with.
You just have to be really intentional about how
Really
you use-
intentional. Yeah, definitely.
And you have to be careful because we've had some like that will use it and maybe could go to different YouTube videos and depending upon the age. And so, like you said, being very intentional and knowing when they're using it with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the phone tools, language tools, definitely, because you don't want to introduce the phone at all in the first 6 months.
At all.
Very important to stress
except
that.
for in your language
if you want to
app.
be set up for some more success.
Yeah. But unless you're using it too, you can use it to look up, like you're wanting to look up shows in the child's native language, definitely. But you're going to be sitting there right next to them watching it. You're going to use this as a bonding and connection time.
And even better if you can put it on the TV and not on the device. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the two of you are watching it together, and you're learning about the child, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. So, yeah. Hard topic. Harder once the child's in your home than you realize, So, but definitely something that goes away eventually. You just have to suffer through it.
Right. One thing I thought about that while you both were talking about it is that's typically not part of the special need, or like when we have kids comes into their home, they feel like they know sort of what those are going to be, the special need, but communication is not one that sort of comes to the front of your mind.
Right.
And in retrospect, that's really one of the most important pieces, because if you can't figure out how to communicate love, support, and items that might be wanted or needed, then you're not meeting their need. And that's why I will tell, like, even for our hearing impaired, it's somebody who, whether or not they've started having any type of device to help them with hearing, or even been to a hearing appointment yet, which is, one of the most important things that you do recommend. But we know if we got to give them a form of communication where typically, you might want them to be able to speak and to hear, but we've still got to give them a form of communication. So gesturing, that's why we love sign language, even during those hard times, because that creates a bond. You are trying to meet my need when I show you this hand signal.
Yeah.
So I know we've done a lot of teaching that with other therapists and early intervention providers. It just communication
So important.
is so important, and families forget that even when they don't have that as a special need, or your child, you're bringing them home and they weren't classified as even having a special need, that is one that is going to be there. You just didn't classify it in your brain that way.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you guys for joining us,
You're
and
welcome.
join us next week for Beneath the Branches.